Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Perfect Blue from 1997. In kind of the regular plot sense, this movie is a psychological thriller about a pop star Mima in a pop group called Champ who is transitioning out of that group to become a serious actress. While that is going on, a obsessed fan is stalking her, possibly, and killing people around her because of this career transition from pop idol to a more serious actress and kind of a gritty drama. I think in a lot of ways that could be really interesting and probably would be a good movie just from what I just said. But I think what makes Perfect Blue kind of so unique and so pivotal and so interesting is its idea of identity. And the idea of identity has been something that's gone through film for a very long time. And the idea of identity with technology, even more so. As one of the other aspects of this film is that someone has created a blog, basically, but at the time it was just a website called Mima's Room, where it basically tell what she was doing. They knew exact things, like I always get off the train with my left foot instead of my right foot, or was it my right foot instead of my left foot? Doesn't matter. They just knew specifics about her that no one else would know. And she's immensely freaked out. She barely knows what the internet is beforehand, and then suddenly she finds out she's got like mad fan fiction about her or something, and she's not exactly sure how to take it. And as this is a transitional time for her, not even sure if she should be doing this, but feels like it's the right way, as her pop group was never all that successful. I mean, they were fine. It didn't seem like she was like struggling necessarily, but they weren't like a huge success, and that maybe this was the better thing for her career, but maybe it's not the best thing for her. And if anyone you know has ever gone through a job transition or a career transition or any life change, there's a lot of times it's sort of rough, and it does kind of like mentally mess with you a lot because you're not sure of yourself, you're not sure of where you're going to be, you're not sure of where you're going, you're not sure, especially if this is the right idea. And so all these killings are going on, and this person is basically describing her life almost in a kind of idealized way of what she wishes it could be. She starts to see this avatar of her past pop idol self, almost taunting her, but kind of showing her like, you know, you wouldn't be doing this if you just stayed a pop star. And a lot of that is showing how media was in 1997. Now, this is more specifically about Japanese pop culture, but I would say it's not too far off than what was going on in America at the time. Particularly, I know they mention her really quickly, calling her Jodie, what's her name, but Jodie Foster famously won Best Actress before Silence of the Lambs for a film with a pretty big rape scene. I think that's sadly how a lot of actresses have had to win Best Actress, is being in a movie like a grittier movie or something. And that was really kind of the messed up ticket to being considered a more serious actress, especially in the 90s when you had indie film booming and more serious minded things, if you want to call them that. And she's basically like maybe not comfortable with how culture is. They're asking her, you need to evolve and mature and all these things, but maybe that's not the way she wants to, but she sort of has to get to this sort of next level. And a lot of times when society or culture demands you become something, I don't think everyone is 100% down with that, of all that entails. And she starts to sort of crack under that. And it explores that. And a lot of what I find fascinating about this film is going into that, but also that this is far more from her perspective and her perspective on what's happening to her than the like crime itself. It doesn't stay within her perspective most of the time, but how a Hitchcock would do it or how a De Palma would do it is almost separate from where Satoshi Kon would do it, because he seems to be more interested in kind of both the mind-bendingness of this, but especially a lot more what she is going through. This is the murder from her perspective. It does remind me of things like, you know, Vertigo, or even things like Dressed to Kill. Not all of them would go into the psychology of it. Maybe Vertigo, I guess, is the best of the psychology of the protagonist, the way this does. Vertigo would be a good example, but I think this takes it one step further, dabbing in the surreal because of that. The avatar aspect of this is something that comes up a lot, because this was way before the internet is what it is now. I think honestly what it's talking about is the idea of a persona, and if you're anyone famous or anyone who does something for a large group of people, those people feel like they sort of quote unquote know you. But in a lot of ways, you never really know anyone really all that well, to be honest, because like you're not going to be in their own head the whole time, even if you could like literally watch them being John Malkovich style. Like there's a whole sort of inter life that like no one will ever really know, so you know that whole idea is stupid. But the whole way of feeling like you know them, when someone says, oh, do you know that person? You kind of just rattle off, oh yeah, they're like blah, blah, blah. They're like this. They like dogs or something. I don't know. But they get their imprint of their personality, or how you feel is their personality. And that goes from like just knowing someone you know at work to just seeing someone you follow on Twitter, or you just hear on a bunch of podcasts, or you're watching on this YouTube video, which other YouTube reviews have done while they're reviewing this movie. I think in a lot of ways you never really know someone fully. But when that avatar or that experience or that idea that you get from those things is confronted with the real person, sometimes it collides in a lot of ways. They might like, giving you that aspect of their personality. They might not like giving you another aspect of your personality. And she is kind of bumping up against that right when, like, this is almost like new media and old media kind of colliding at once, and her trying to figure out her way through either when she's not really comfortable with how either is going. It's kind of like your persona has kind of taken on life that you never expected it to, which we've heard from, major pop stars like Madonna to Cher, or Britney Spears even. They've all commented on, they feel like it's not about them anymore. It's about this persona that they don't even have control of. And this is kind of more giving it a little more credence, giving it more of a excuse. But I know I've read like interviews with Madonna where she talks about how like there's certain things the press would just go wild with something and she had absolutely no control of it. And how horrifying is it that as hard as you are working for a particular perspective, how you are working for your own art, that suddenly it's something that you can't control at all, that resembles you, and part of it is you, but it is not you. And you sort of almost hate that other thing, but you almost wish you could be that other thing. And it's a very complicated feeling. So what Mima's going through in this film is intense in a personal level. It's almost as much of a character drama as it is a psychological thriller. And I'm almost sometimes even questioning who killed what and what have you. And I've seen this movie before. This was not my first time seeing it, but I've always kind of questioned like what is the real reality of it and what isn't, even if it tries to kind of explain itself away in the end. I do also like living in that ambiguity when I watch films, so maybe that's just like me being weird. But I often wonder fully who is controlling everything, but I also think this film is not really about that. It's her figuring out who she is through this massive transition in her life when this is happening at the same time. This film really cares about her as a character, and she is kind of the main point of focus of this film, not this thriller, not these stabbings or something like that. I mean, if you're going to do a slasher film, it's almost like the slasher film really more cared about Laurie Strode than it cared about Michael Myers. It's not trying to just be a slasher film, it's trying to be so much more. And it's trying to talk about that personal change. Now, you could say that with Satoshi Kon, as this was his directorial debut. He was clearly going through I don't know, I haven't read anything about how he felt about it, but I can almost see like how this reflected what he was going through at the exact same time. Because having a big career change or taking on a major project you've never done before is scary and confusing, and it's not cool to talk about, especially with those, which is sad because you'd think we'd be a little more open-minded about mental health and the artistic process, but it is actually really scary, and there's a lot of times you doubt yourself and you doubt your abilities. She wasn't comfortable with doing a lot of this stuff, but she just did it. And it speaks to, I think a lot of it, this film speaks to society in itself, and how the society at the time demanded like, hey, you're famous, you want to be an actress who, in a Hollywood sense, Oscar nominated and so forth, or gets taken more seriously by major directors or the public at large, you have to do this darker thing, and you, in a sense, have to get like raped on screen, and you have to let your audience go through that trauma, and you have to shed that public persona. How many people, how many actresses or singers have to go through like this transitional period that maybe, a lot of them just get rid of so quickly because, maybe they're not comfortable with that, and it was something they were sort of forced into. I often think of like what this film would have been like if it had been, I don't really like live action remakes at all, but if this had been remade like in the late 90s with someone like a Britney Spears or Christina Aguilera or something, or that idea of that persona, I don't think they're not like great actresses or anything. Going into that whole thing and how them transitioning out of those things. I also think the idea of reality and losing oneself within the kind of psychological trauma of this, but I also think Satoshi Kon gets into like, well, where does the real person begin and the persona or the role you're playing end? In a lot of ways, the kind of confusion that this one puts you in shows you that like there are certain aspects, like when you make a particular piece of work, that could be that part of your personality. But then when you do a different piece of work, that could be a different part of your personality. And that's not to say that like that either is a lie and isn't you, but it is to say that those are different sides of you. And I think understanding when you're doing show or show business or art or music or anything like that is understanding that sort of separation while also showing you as an individual, but showing you as an individual through this thing. And that's a confusing thing to figure out artistically, especially if you've been doing sort of like one thing that you were very comfortable with and kind of excelling at, and suddenly you're put into something else and it's a challenge. Sometimes that goes, hey, fuck challenges, just get through it. But it's, challenging and hard to do such things. I also think what Satoshi Kon says a lot about this is, I think this film even questions her persona and her avatar and what is the real you in the end. I mean, to be honest, when a celebrity or an actor dies, who do we really know of them? Like, I don't really know Charlie Chaplin, but I feel like I know a Charlie Chaplin movie. More of us will know that Charlie Chaplin than ever knew the Charlie Chaplin that his family did. But that's the real Charlie Chaplin. In some ways, this is a question that we've been asking. Citizen Kane asked this. It's like, does Rosebud answer anything? No, not really. You don't really understand who he was that entire time. It's kind of like you want meaning towards it, and you sort of want meaning beyond who they really are. There's a recent celebrity who dies. We think we know that persona. And Perfect Blue, I think, examines all of that, while also doing a very compelling idea that their fans and the public doesn't want to let go of that certain aspect of it, but another side of it is really embracing her as this character on this crime drama, which honestly doesn't seem that good, to be honest with you. I think Perfect Blue is probably one of the great animes. I remember seeing it and being sort of floored by it, because it's Hitchcockian in a way. It is like an intense murder mystery thing, but it's almost like, I think, understands how important character is to this, because this is obviously all about her, and it's the most appropriate way to go about this sort of thing. Like, he's more interested in playing in this sort of world of the surreal, but doing it in sort of a very individual protagonist perspective. There's a lot of it that makes me wonder, well, where did this killer start, and where did her ideas of dealing with her past self start, and where do they correspond, and how much of it was set up, and how much of it also was her starting it herself and this taking advantage of that. I don't really know. And I think, having a basic, ending explained video or something, I don't think should explain it, because I think it should make you question all of those things, especially now that we do have, Instagrams and Facebooks, and you feel like you're presenting a certain thing. It should make you question a lot of that and question what you're doing and putting out, and not letting that thing become something you don't want it to be because you want the likes or the clicks or something like that, because you feel like society demands you do a certain thing. There's certain times you'd be like, oh, I better comment on this. But at a certain point, you start to lose your perspective. And I feel like she sort of sadly did, but maybe she never knew who she was through that band. We don't really know much about that band before. Maybe that was like part of who she was. But I think like this rabid fan thing and seeing like how other fans perceive you and feeling like you should live up to that is kind of a sad thing, because there's certainly people who excelled and got her to a certain level, but they're not going to help her really as a person. They're just in love with this kind of entertaining avatar of itself. And that might seem empty, but I don't think for her it was empty, which makes it complicated. If to her it was just like, I was in this band, whatever, we sang some dumb songs, but it clearly meant something to her. She liked being that person. I can really relate to that, because I have, transitioned through a lot of stuff in my life, and sometimes you're kind of nostalgic for what happened before. Sometimes you feel like you don't even feel like yourself as much as you did feel like yourself in that other time. I think what Perfect Blue shows you is like why it's so kind of relatable and becomes such a big movie, is she was losing herself through an incredibly hard, stressful time. She's in this drama series, she's not sure if she can do it. People are getting killed left and right who work with her. She's having to do these nude scenes, which she feels like she should just do. That seems an incredibly intense, hard, stressful period. And of course you're going to lose perspective on what's a dream and what's not, and what's going on, and while people are also taking advantage of that fact as well. This is an intensely wonderful psychological thriller, and at a time in the 90s where there are quite a lot of them, this might be one of, if not the best of that time period. And I'm not just saying in animation, not that there's a lot of those, but like in terms of overall. This really goes into the whole playing, interestingly enough, in the psyche. I think there's a lot of psychological thrillers where you're like, oh, they're totally messing with you. But this really makes me think about my own identity and my identity online. And this was a long time ago, and it probably is one of the films that gets the internet more right from the 90s about what's going on now than anything. While at the same time, it's actually being one of the more intensely psychological thrillers we've seen since like something like Vertigo from Hitchcock. What Vertigo does is it takes you into that regret and that wanting kind of something back from the past. I think Perfect Blue does that as well. I just know that this movie makes me think a lot about persona and perspective and idea and identity and the artistic process and everything like that. And the animation is crisp and beautiful in a way. It's very much trying to say something about Japanese culture. It was almost apparently live action, and one could say like, well, why is this animated? But I think what this does with animation is it takes on something that animation has always had, and I've talked about this a lot of times before, but anything can happen in animation. And in a sense, that what makes Perfect Blue almost that much more unnerving. Because you know if you see a special effects in a live action film, most of the time you know it's a special effect. If you see something moving in an animated film, it can pop out at you and break that reality while also being a part of it. And for a film like Perfect Blue, and with the masterpiece as it is, that's pivotal to showing you kind of the surrealism and also the perspective and the intensity of being wrapped up in it that it does. When it gets into the psychological nature and understanding her and going through identity, it kind of leaves you showing that, like, I think she found more of herself going through it, but that doubt and that trauma and that transition really is what gave her kind of herself through that, sadly. And you can see that echoed earlier in the movie, but when you get through those times, you kind of see how that shaped your psyche in itself and shaped your identity, that questioning of the identity of itself. But it also makes you kind of realize why you were nostalgic for the past, but also why you need to leave it behind and sort of grow from it, because that past self can't live on forever. So if you have seen Perfect Blue and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.